There's a nighttime habit almost everyone has that quietly tells your body to start packing fat around your liver, your pancreas, and your gut. Not the fat you can pinch on your arms or your stomach, but a far more dangerous kind that wraps itself around your internal organs, working in silence, hidden from view, invisible on a bathroom scale, and often invisible even to a doctor unless they're specifically looking for it. Most people have no idea they're doing this every single night because it doesn't feel like a big deal in the moment. It doesn't feel like something that could be reshaping your metabolism while you sleep, quietly rewriting the biochemistry running underneath your skin. But here's what's actually happening. Picture yourself lying in bed, phone light washing over your face at 11 at night, maybe finishing off a bag of chips you told yourself you wouldn't touch after dinner, or scrolling through videos just for 10 more minutes that somehow stretches into an hour. It feels harmless. It feels like the day is basically over, so what does it matter now? The meal is eaten, the day is done, tomorrow is a new start. That's the story most of us tell ourselves. But your body isn't keeping score the way your mind is. Your body is doing something very specific and very deliberate while you scroll. It's rerouting fat storage straight to the most dangerous real estate you have. The space wrapped around your liver, your pancreas, your intestines, the deep abdominal cavity that houses the organs keeping you alive every second of every day. This is visceral fat, and it behaves nothing like the fat you can grab with your fingers. Subcutaneous fat, the kind under your skin, is mostly just storage. It sits there, largely inert, cushioning your body, insulating you, waiting patiently to be used for energy later if it's ever needed. It's the fat evolution designed as a savings account. Visceral fat is a completely different animal. It's metabolically active tissue that functions almost like an organ of its own, pumping out inflammatory signals around the clock. Hormones and chemical messengers that ripple outward and touch nearly every system in your body. Your cardiovascular system, your immune system, your endocrine system, even your brain, and the timing of when you eat, when you experience stress, and when you sleep, has an outsized, almost disproportionate effect on how much of this specific fat your body decides to build, store, and hold on to. This is the part that surprises most people, because we've all been trained to think of weight gain as simple math. Calories in, calories out, end of story. But your body isn't a spreadsheet. It's a living system built on rhythms, ancient biological rhythms, that predate electricity, that predate refrigerators and streaming apps and nightly snack runs to the kitchen. Researchers studying circadian biology, the science of your internal biological clock, have found that this clock controls far more than just when you feel sleepy or awake. It controls how your body partitions the calories you eat, deciding in real time whether incoming energy should be burned immediately, stored temporarily, or shuttled into long-term reserves, and it makes that decision differently depending on the hour on the clock. During the day, especially in daylight hours, your body is primed by insulin sensitivity and cortisol rhythms that have been fine-tuned over hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution, built around a world where humans woke with the sun, hunted and gathered and worked during daylight, and rested when darkness fell. During those daylight hours, your cells respond efficiently to insulin, the hormone that ushers glucose out of your bloodstream and into your cells to be used as fuel. Food eaten during the day gets handled well. Burned for energy, used to fuel your muscles, your brain, your organs, the countless biological processes running in the background just to keep you alive. But late at night, something shifts. Insulin sensitivity drops, sometimes dramatically, and the exact same plate of food that would have been efficiently used for fuel at noon instead gets shuttled straight into storage when eaten at 10 or 11 at night. And here's the critical detail that makes this so relevant to the topic at hand. Visceral fat depots are especially responsive to this nighttime shift, more so than fat stored just under the skin. Your body, operating on ancient instructions it doesn't know or outdated, treats nighttime eating as a signal to prepare for scarcity, to store rather than burn, and it reaches first for the storage depots that are quickest to access and quickest to expand, which happen to be the ones wrapped around your organs. This isn't a fringe theory or a wellness blog exaggeration. It's been observed again and again in structured research. Consider the studies conducted on shift workers, people whose jobs require them to work through the night and sleep during the day, essentially living with their internal clock running in reverse compared to the rest of society. These studies consistently show higher rates of abdominal obesity, insulin resistance, and full-blown metabolic syndrome in shift workers compared to people who work standard daytime hours. And remarkably, this holds true even when researchers control for total daily calorie intake. Meaning it's not simply that shift workers eat more, it's that their bodies are handling the same amount of food differently, storing more of it as visceral fat, because they're eating and processing food during hours when their internal biology is primed for storage rather than for burning. It's not just about how much you eat, it's about when your body is actually prepared to deal with it. And this single distinction, timing over quantity, might be one of the most underappreciated concepts in modern nutrition science. And there's a second piece of this puzzle that most people never connect to their waistline at all, something that has nothing to do with food directly but influences fat storage almost as powerfully. Sleep. When you cut your sleep short, staying up late scrolling, watching one more episode, working past midnight, or when your sleep gets fragmented and interrupted by late night screen use, alcohol, stress, or an anxious mind that won't settle down, your body responds by ramping up production of cortisol, your primary stress hormone. Cortisol exists for good reason. In short bursts, it helps you respond to danger, mobilizing energy reserves quickly so you can react, run, fight, or problem solve under pressure. It's a survival mechanism baked deep into your physiology. But cortisol was never meant to run high constantly, night after night, week after week. Chronically elevated cortisol, the kind you get from poor sleep repeated over months and years, doesn't just leave you feeling wired, anxious, and exhausted at the same time. It directly signals your body to preferentially store new fat viscerally, deep around your internal organs, rather than under the skin, where it would be comparatively harmless and far less dangerous to your long-term health. Scientists studying the receptors on fat cells have actually found something remarkable. Visceral fat tissue carries a significantly higher density of cortisol receptors compared to subcutaneous fat. In plain terms, this means visceral fat is essentially built, at a cellular level, to respond to stress hormones by expanding. It's almost as if this particular fat depot is waiting for the stress signal, primed and ready to grow the moment cortisol levels rise. So when you find yourself stressed about work, underslept because you stayed up too late, and eating late in the evening because that's when you finally have a moment to yourself, you are pulling all three of these levers at exactly the same time. And every one of them pushes your body toward building this specific, dangerous kind of fat. Worse, you're doing it at precisely the hour of day when your metabolism is least equipped to handle the intake, when insulin sensitivity is already declining and your body is biologically leaning toward storage over burning. It's a perfect storm hiding inside what looks like an ordinary, unremarkable nighttime routine. None of this is meant to suggest that nighttime eating is inherently evil in some mystical, moralistic sense. Food itself isn't the enemy, and there's nothing shameful about eating in the evening. The real issue is that your biology genuinely operates on a different set of rules after dark, following a rhythm shaped over an almost unimaginable stretch of evolutionary time. In modern life, with its glowing screens propped up inches from your face at midnight, its late dinners pushed back by long commutes and busy schedules, its irregular sleep patterns disrupted by everything from streaming shows to late-night anxiety spirals, is working directly against that ancient rhythm your body still runs on beneath the surface, whether you're aware of it or not. Your ancestors didn't have refrigerators stocked with snacks or phones lighting up at midnight. Their bodies developed rules for handling food and rest based on the sun, and those rules didn't get an update just because modern life changed everything around them. And so every night, millions of people unknowingly work against biology that's been running the same way for a very, very long time, flipping on a light switch in a room that's built to be dark, and wondering later why the fat around their organs keeps quietly growing. So why should you actually care about visceral fat specifically, instead of just worrying about your weight in general terms the way most people do? Glancing at a scale number, or how their genes fit and calling it a day? Because this fat isn't just sitting there quietly looking unflattering. It's actively communicating with the rest of your body in ways that drive real, measurable disease, and it's doing this around the clock whether you're aware of it or not, whether you feel sick or feel perfectly fine. This is one of the hardest things for people to wrap their heads around, because visceral fat doesn't announce itself the way a broken bone or a bad cough does. It works in silence for years, sometimes for decades, before it shows up as something you can actually feel. Visceral fat cells release a steady, continuous stream of inflammatory molecules called cytokines, things like interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha, directly into the bloodstream that feeds your liver. Think of it almost like a factory sitting right next to a river, dumping its runoff straight into the water supply downstream. Your liver, marinating in these inflammatory signals day after day, year after year, responds by producing more C-reactive protein, a marker doctors routinely use in blood tests to gauge systemic inflammation throughout your entire body. When your doctor checks this marker and it comes back elevated, visceral fat is very often part of the underlying story, even if nobody in the room mentions it directly. This is what researchers mean when they talk about inflammaging, a term combining inflammation and aging, describing the slow, chronic, low-grade inflammation that seems to sit underneath almost every major disease associated with getting older. From heart disease to type 2 diabetes to certain types of cancer. It's not a dramatic, feverish kind of inflammation you'd notice in the moment. It's a quiet simmer that never fully turns off, wearing down your tissues bit by bit over years. And visceral fat is one of the biggest engines driving that inflammation. Because unlike fat stored elsewhere in your body, your hips, your arms, the backs of your thighs, visceral fat sits in direct anatomical proximity to your portal vein, the vessel that carries blood straight from your digestive organs to your liver. That means whatever this fat releases doesn't have to travel far or get diluted on its way through your general circulation. It hits your liver first, directly, and it hits it hard every single day, in a way that fat stored elsewhere in your body simply doesn't. This is a major reason why visceral fat is so strongly linked to fatty liver disease, a condition that's exploding in prevalence across the US, even in people who don't drink alcohol at all. The condition doctors now call non-alcoholic fatty liver disease specifically because it surprises so many people to learn their liver problems have nothing to do with drinking. Your liver, under this constant inflammatory pressure, starts accumulating fat of its own, becomes inflamed, and over years that ongoing inflammation can slowly, silently progress towards scarring, a process called fibrosis that, left unchecked for long enough, can eventually threaten the liver's ability to function properly at all. But the story doesn't stop at the liver. It goes further into territory that surprises even people who consider themselves fairly health conscious. There's a fascinating and honestly a little unsettling connection between visceral fat and something called angiogenesis, which is the biological process by which your body grows entirely new blood vessels. Growing tissue of any kind, including tumors, needs a reliable, ongoing blood supply in order to survive, expand, and access the oxygen and nutrients it needs to keep growing. Visceral fat tissue has been shown in a substantial body of research to secrete growth factors, including one called vascular endothelial growth factor, often abbreviated VEGF, that actively encourage this new blood vessel formation. Some cancer researchers believe this is part of why obesity, and visceral obesity specifically, is associated with both higher risk and worse outcomes for several cancers, including colorectal cancer, pancreatic cancer, and postmenopausal breast cancer. The working theory being that visceral fat doesn't just create a generally inflamed environment throughout the body. It may actually help supply some of the vascular infrastructure that abnormal, rapidly dividing cells need in order to take hold, establish themselves, and eventually spread. Now, it's genuinely important to be careful and precise with that distinction, because this is exactly the kind of claim that gets exaggerated online. None of this means visceral fat directly causes cancer on its own, and no serious researcher would claim that. But the biological plausibility here is real, and it's backed by mechanisms that have been studied at the cellular level. Combined with the strength of the correlation, seen across large population studies tracking many thousands of people over many years of follow-up. Put together, this is strong enough evidence that oncologists now consider visceral adiposity a genuinely meaningful risk factor worth discussing with patients during routine checkups, right alongside more familiar risk factors like family history and smoking status. Then there's your gut, which sits closer to this fat, physically, than almost anything else in your entire body. Visceral fat nestles right up against your intestines, wrapping around them in the same crowded abdominal cavity. And a growing body of research shows a genuine two-way relationship between this fat and your gut microbiome. The trillions of bacteria living throughout your digestive tract, quietly influencing everything from digestion to immune function to even your mood. Chronic inflammation coming from visceral fat can gradually damage the lining of your intestines, making it more permeable, a condition often informally referred to as leaky gut, which allows small bacterial fragments that should stay contained within your digestive tract to slip into your bloodstream instead, where they trigger even more inflammation throughout your body, creating a feedback loop that becomes genuinely difficult to break once it gets going. At the same time, an imbalanced microbiome, often driven by poor diet quality, low fiber intake, and irregular eating patterns, has been shown in animal studies to actively promote even more visceral fat storage, partly by affecting how efficiently the body extracts and stores energy from food, and partly by influencing the same inflammatory pathways we've already talked about. It becomes a vicious, self-reinforcing cycle. The fat damages the gut, and the disrupted gut in turn promotes more fat, and round it goes quietly in the background, long before you'd ever notice it on a scale, in the mirror, or in how your clothes fit, which is exactly why so many people are dealing with the downstream effects of this process for years without ever knowing the real engine driving it sits deep in their abdomen, wrapped around organs they can't see or feel, working steadily against them, one inflamed signal at a time. Now, here's where this story takes a turn that most people never expect. Because so far, everything might sound like it's building toward bad news piled on top of more bad news. But visceral fat actually has one major advantage hiding inside all this danger, and that advantage is speed. Precisely because this fat is so metabolically active, so chemically reactive, so deeply wired into your hormonal signaling, it responds unusually fast to changes in behavior, faster than almost any other type of fat in your body. This cuts both ways, of course. It's quick to accumulate under the wrong conditions, as we've already covered, but it's also quick to shrink once you remove the specific drivers that were feeding it in the first place. This is genuinely encouraging news, and it's where two ideas that get thrown around constantly in health and wellness circles, often without much real explanation behind them, actually start to earn their keep: fasting and metabolism. Time-restricted eating, sometimes called intermittent fasting, involves compressing your eating window into a defined stretch of time, say 8 to 10 hours during daylight, and then stopping food intake for the remaining hours. Ideally finishing your last meal a few hours before you go to sleep, rather than snacking right up until bedtime. This approach has been studied specifically for its effects on visceral fat, and the results across multiple trials are consistently encouraging. One well-known study conducted at the University of Alabama at Birmingham found something particularly striking. Even without changing what people ate, without cutting calories or eliminating entire food groups, simply narrowing the eating window and stopping food intake earlier in the evening improved insulin sensitivity and reduced markers linked directly to visceral fat storage within just a few weeks of consistent practice. This makes complete sense once you understand the biology we've already walked through together. If your body's insulin sensitivity naturally declines in the evening hours, following that ancient circadian rhythm still running quietly beneath the surface, then eating your last meal earlier in the day means you're working with your biology instead of constantly fighting against it, giving your body a longer, uninterrupted stretch of overnight fasting during which it can shift out of storage mode and into fat-burning mode instead. This overnight fasting window is also when a fascinating cellular process called autophagy ramps up significantly, and it's worth understanding because it connects directly to longevity research that's gained enormous attention in recent years. Autophagy is essentially your cell's internal cleanup crew, a built-in maintenance system that clears out damaged proteins, malfunctioning cellular components, and cellular debris that accumulates naturally over time just from the ordinary business of being alive. Longevity researchers have connected robust, well-functioning autophagy to lower rates of age-related disease across multiple studies, viewing it as one of the underlying mechanisms that might help explain why some people age more gracefully than others at the cellular level. Interestingly, chronic overeating, especially late at night when your body should ideally be resting and repairing rather than digesting, appears to blunt this cleanup process significantly, since your cells end up too busy processing incoming nutrients from a late meal to properly focus on repair and maintenance work instead. Sleep is the other major lever here, and it might honestly be even more powerful than most people realize, partly because it requires no willpower around food whatsoever, and partly because its effects show up faster than many people expect. Multiple clinical trials have found that improving sleep duration and quality, even without any dietary changes at all, leads to measurable, trackable reductions in visceral fat over a period of just a few months. One particularly notable study had participants extend their sleep from under 6.5 hours a night, which is unfortunately close to the American average these days, to closer to 8.5 hours consistently. And simply by making that one change, participants naturally reduced their overall caloric intake without even trying to diet. Likely because sleep deprivation disrupts two key hormones that control hunger and fullness: ghrelin and leptin. Ghrelin, often called the hunger hormone because it signals your brain that it's time to eat, rises noticeably when you're sleep deprived, while leptin, the hormone responsible for signaling fullness and satisfaction after a meal, drops at the same time. So a tired body isn't just cranky, irritable, and foggy the next day. It's genuinely biochemically primed to overeat, and research shows it tends to crave exactly the high-calorie, high-sugar, highly processed foods that feed visceral fat storage most efficiently, almost as if poor sleep sets a trap that's specifically engineered to sabotage your best intentions the following day. Understanding this changes the entire conversation around willpower and self-control, because it turns out that fixing your sleep might do more for your midsection than fixing your diet alone ever could, simply by removing the underlying biochemical pressure that makes overeating feel almost involuntary in the first place. And this single insight alone has quietly reshaped how many nutrition researchers now think about the real starting point for tackling stubborn visceral fat. Here's paragraph 4, expanded to match. None of this requires some extreme overhaul of your entire life, throwing out every food you enjoy, or adopting some rigid regimen that collapses after 2 exhausting weeks. The research actually points towards small, practical, sustainable changes that work because they cooperate with your biology instead of fighting it every single day. The first and probably most impactful is simple in concept, even if it takes some real adjustment in practice. Aim to finish eating 2 to 3 hours before you go to sleep, giving your body a genuine window to shift out of digestion mode and into rest and repair mode before you close your eyes. This doesn't mean starving yourself in the evening or white-knuckling through hunger pangs at 9 at night. It just means shifting your dinner earlier where you can, and treating that late-night kitchen trip as something to notice rather than something automatic. The second piece is protecting a consistent sleep schedule, going to bed and waking up at roughly the same time even on weekends, because your circadian rhythm responds far better to consistency than to occasional long stretches of catch-up sleep after a few short nights. A body that knows roughly when rest is coming handles hormones like cortisol, ghrelin, and leptin far more predictably than one constantly guessing at its own schedule. Third, and this one surprises people because it seems almost too simple to matter, is dimming bright screens in the evening hours. Since the blue light emitted by phones, tablets, and TVs suppresses melatonin production and delays your body's natural transition into rest mode, sometimes by a significant margin. Even something as small as switching your phone to night mode after sunset, or reading under warmer, dimmer light instead of scrolling under a bright screen, can meaningfully support this transition. Fourth, managing evening stress with something genuinely calming rather than scrolling through social media, which tends to activate your nervous system rather than soothe it, despite how relaxing it might feel in the moment, matters more than most people give it credit for. A short walk, some quiet stretching, reading an actual book, or simply sitting somewhere without a screen for 20 minutes can measurably lower the cortisol response that we now know pushes fat storage specifically toward the visceral organ-wrapping kind. Fifth, building light movement into your evening routine, even something as simple as a 10 or 15-minute walk after dinner, has been shown in research to blunt the post-meal insulin spike that contributes to fat storage, particularly when that meal happens later in the day when your insulin sensitivity is already naturally declining. This one habit alone, a short walk instead of immediately sitting or lying down after eating, has shown up again and again in studies as a low-effort, high-impact intervention that people can actually stick with long-term, unlike more extreme dietary restrictions that tend to fall apart within weeks. The overarching lesson running through all of this research, tying every single piece back together, is that your body isn't operating on some simple, cold calories in, calories out spreadsheet the way diet culture has taught most of us to believe for decades. It's running on rhythms, ancient biological rhythms tied to light, darkness, stress, and rest. And when you respect those rhythms, especially around eating and sleep timing in the evening hours, you give your body the genuine chance to actually reverse the specific kind of fat that drives the most serious health risks we've talked about today. From liver disease to chronic inflammation to the blood vessel growth that concerns cancer researchers, rather than just managing your weight on the surface, while the real problem keeps quietly building underneath. The good news, and it's worth sitting with this for a moment before you close out this video, is that visceral fat isn't a life sentence carved in stone the way some other health risks can feel. It's remarkably responsive to exactly the kind of small, consistent, sustainable changes most people can actually make and keep making, not through extreme willpower or dramatic transformation, but through simply working with the rhythm your body has been running on all along.